All right, so we'll just jump right into it. Jordan, again, thank you for that very thoughtful introduction. And the focus today is going to be on mental toughness, performance excellence, and performance profiling as a technique to help teach mental skills to athletes. My focus today is really on the mind pillar. The mind pillar is defined by USA Volleyball as training our minds to maximize performance. So it's one of the key foundational elements of the USA development model. And the focus of today's session is really going to be help teaching you all a technique and an intervention that you can use that will help get you inside your players' heads. So let's just move on. When it comes to matters of the mind, I think one of the things that most athletes and coaches think of is the term mental toughness. We are constantly inundated by messages and external pressure to be mentally tough as athletes, as coaches, as competitors. Mental toughness is constantly talked about by athletes, coaches, sports psychologists. It's talked about by sports broadcasters. It's talked about by journalists. It's in the news. It's one of the most common things that's talked about when it comes to the mental aspect of sports. But here's the thing with mental toughness. Experts can't agree on a definition. Meaning, if we were to ask like 40 different volleyball players or 40 different coaches, what is the definition of mental toughness? We're probably going to get a wide range of answers. In fact, some experts believe that mental toughness is one of the most overused but misunderstood concepts in sports psychology, which obviously can be really problematic, especially if we're working with young athletes, if we're not clear on what mental toughness actually even is. And lastly, I want to offer the idea that mental toughness the idea of being and pushing athletes to be mentally tough could be a health risk because mental toughness actually prioritizes performance over mental and physical health. So in other words, by promoting mental toughness, we're pressuring athletes to actually hide their injuries and to avoid showing pain, right? It's the old concept of no pain, no gain, right? Which really isn't actually helpful when we're also trying to develop whole athletes and concerned about athletes' mental health in today's world. So I'd like to offer a more holistic term. And I think especially when we're working with young athletes, which I know a lot of the coaches on this call are, might be a little bit healthier and more expansive and more holistic. It's the concept of performance excellence. So I'd like to offer a shift in thinking from mental toughness to performance excellence. I'm not saying that mental toughness is bad or should never be used. I'm just offering a new definition that feels a little bit more holistic and in line with the USA Volleyball development model. So this is one of my favorite definitions of performance excellence. Athletes are able to focus their minds, trust their training, and allow their bodies to perform, connecting their performance to a larger purpose that is inspiring and fulfilling for their soul. I mean, how good does this sound? This feels to me a lot more aligned with the holistic approach, especially when we're working with young athletes. I will say there are, in sports psychology, if you're going to dive into the research, there are multiple approaches to teaching performance excellence, but covering the details of those approaches and theories is a little bit beyond the scope of the presentation today, but I have included a bunch of resources. If you want to dive deeper into that, you can. But let's just get right into performance excellence. So one of the main advantages that I see with really advocating and teaching this concept of performance excellence is that it includes the learning potential of mistakes, and it includes a plan for recovery. So rather than just focusing on mental toughness, which I feel can sometimes perpetuate a standard of maladaptive perfectionism among athletes with no room for errors. Performance excellence, on the other hand, really encourages athletes to perform authentically, It gives athletes permission to fail and recognizes that there is a lot of learning potential and can be value in the mistakes that are made. And it teaches athletes, encourages athletes to really become experts on how to make errors effectively, how to recover from errors. It includes error recovery in the pursuit of performance excellence. So in other words, we have to expect mistakes to be made in volleyball, and we have to learn from our mistakes in order to improve. So this model of performance excellence includes both the skill and the error. So skills might be they might be motor aspects, so things like the athlete's strength, athlete's performance. It could also be cognitive aspects, so things like pattern recognition, decision making on the court, or it can be motor cognitive aspects such as like eye-hand coordination. And when we're talking about errors, we're talking about a range of variables that cause athletes to make mistakes. They could be anything from stress about school, could be a text message they received right before they walked into practice, or it can be an opponent, it can be someone in the fans, referees, overanalysis, self-doubt, any kind of thing that causes athletes to make errors. So I think that having conversations with athletes around what the purpose of errors and error recovery is so critical. And we hear Karch talk about this all the time, right? Karch frequently talks about the importance of risk-taking in the learning process, and especially in volleyball being a game of mistakes. One of the things he said, which I just love so much, is that the volleyball is a game of mistakes in which even if you're winning the match, you're losing at least half of you might lose at least half of the points in any given game, right? And you can still win the match. So therefore, we have to expect to make mistakes in volleyball. And yet, we all know this, and yet athletes can be so hard on themselves when they make a mistake, right? So there's this shift in mentality when we're expecting to make mistakes. If we're playing at the edge of our growth capacity, we're going to make mistakes, right? If we're going after those hard shots, we're going to make mistakes. And how are we recovering from them? That is all part of the pursuit of performance excellence. So how do we teach performance excellence? Well, hopefully at this point, I've at least made you curious and a little bit interested in shifting some language around the concept of performance excellence and giving you a new framework that is a bit more holistic and incorporates error recovery. So how we teach performance excellence. Here's the thing, performance excellence is not a single skill. It's not a single skill like digging or setting or blocking. It's actually an entire set of mental skills that contribute to consistent optimal performance in competition, so in games. So what are mental skills? Mental skills are sports-specific psychological skills that contribute to an athlete's ability to optimally perform. I like to think about mental skills as the building blocks of performance excellence. So I'm going to run through a few examples of mental skills that I use with my athletes, that athletes and coaches often come up with. So we'll just run through them now. These are not exclusive by any means. There's many more that you will probably be able to think of. But these are just a few of the ones that I think are really foundational, specific to volleyball. So confidence, such a huge one, individual and team confidence, concentration, communication being such a critical aspect of teamwork, emotion regulation, where do our athletes need to be to perform optimally, right? They might not all be on the same level energetically, and certain athletes might perform better with different emotions that are present. Teamwork, obviously a critical one. Motivation, both intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Commitment, attitude, resilience, and gratitude, coachability, right? And flexibility. So these are just some examples of mental skills. And here's the thing with mental skills. I like to encourage coaches and athletes to approach mental skill training the same way we approach strength training, right? You're not just going to go hit the gym one time before season starts or 2 or 3 times throughout the course of the season and think that you're going to be able to be like strong enough to perform your best, right? There's no way we would approach physical strength training that way. We need to approach mental training the same way. We need to think about mental training as something we do repetitively and consistently, just like strength training. So with mental training, we don't necessarily have to spend as much time as we do in the gym, but that consistency can be really, really important. Think about it just like small touches each day or each practice. So now that you have a general overview of performance excellence and an idea of what types of mental skills are really important for volleyball, I want to now sort of dive into teaching about a tool called performance profiling. So what is performance profiling? Performance profiling is an athlete-led assessment method used by sports psychology professionals for the purpose of identifying an athlete's psychological strengths and weaknesses. It was originally developed in 1992 by Butler and Hardy as a tool for sports psychologists to help gain an understanding of what's going on in the athletes' minds. I really like this tool because you can use it with individual athletes, you can use it with the entire team, and you can also use it yourself as a coach. Another reason why I really like it is because you can use it and adjust it for any age or level or ability. So players that are just starting out, that are brand new, young players, this is a great way to structure the conversation around teaching mental skills, getting them thinking about what mental skills they need to be developing. Also, the self-analysis, recognizing where they need to improve. And also I like it because it's free, to be honest. It's free and you can use it. And I'm going to be providing you with you will get a worksheet in the model that you can use with your young athletes. And we'll talk about that more later. It's super accessible to anyone. So in volleyball terms, what is performance profiling? It's simply a tool coaches can use to get inside your players' minds, right? By asking them to identify their mental strengths and their mental weaknesses. So I'm wondering how many of you on this call have ever had the thought during a match of what is going on in that player's head, right? Or maybe it sounded something like, what on earth were they thinking? Well, this is a tool that can help you answer that question. So I'll run through a few more benefits of performance profiling, and then I'm actually going to take you through the steps of what performance profiling is and how you can actually use it with your team. First benefit is that it integrates goal setting. So it forces athletes to actually ask themselves, where am I now? It's a self-assessment. Where am I now and where do I want to be in the future? Or another way to say that might be, where are my strengths and weaknesses? It also empowers athletes by giving them some autonomy and control over their own practice plan. So instead of you as a coach going to your athlete and saying, hey, I think you're really weak in this area, which generally you can receive some resistance when you say that, right? People generally don't like to be told what their weaknesses are, even though it isn't necessary sometimes. Instead, we're flipping it, right? We're going to the athlete and saying, hey, I want you to tell me where you think your weaknesses are. Especially when we're talking about matters of the mind as an athlete, it can be really hard to know what the athlete's weaknesses are because we don't know what they're thinking. We don't know what's going on. We don't know if they're distracted or if they have negative self-talk or low confidence. We don't really know why they made the mental error, but they do. And so this gives us a way to have conversations about it. It gives them more of an active role in their improvement process. It's very collaborative in nature, meaning athletes are learning about themselves, and they're also having a conversation with the coaches about where their weaknesses are, what they need to improve, where they want to be, and how they can get there. So it promotes social interaction between player and player, between player and coach, in a way, in an environment that is a little bit more structured, and so therefore feels safe. There's more of a container around it. So it's great for athletes that you're having a difficult time connecting with. Maybe they have a if you don't have a sense of whether they're listening or if they're really taking it in, if their level of comprehension. This is a great way to have those types of conversation with athletes. It also builds rapport, or helps the relationship between athlete and coach. Also athlete and athlete, if we do a team performance profile. It promotes self-reflection and self-awareness. So this is really a first step in helping athletes critically think about where they are as a player, and what they need to work on. And then lastly, it is both an assessment and an intervention. And by that, I mean, there's sports psych language a little bit to describe. It can be used as a tool to actually evaluate where the athlete is at. So in that sense, it's an assessment. But it can also be used as an intervention, meaning it can be used as a teaching mechanism to actually help increase their motivation with some goal structure, and also increase self-awareness. So now that I have talked a lot about the benefits, I want to just go ahead and dive into it with you. What does it actually look like? I have broken it down into 3 steps. The first step is the introduction. So at this stage, we're really just introducing what a performance profile is to the athlete. So on the right side of the screen, you see kind of like a bullseye looking set of circles. I have 8 there. You can use anywhere from 8 to 12. But basically what we're doing is we're using this tool to help athletes learn about themselves. So when we're explaining it to athletes, we want to make sure they know we're not using this. This is not stats. This is not statistics that we're using to determine who is starting. This is not what we're using to change any, rotation or anything like that. We are using this to help us figure out what we're going to work on. So I like to think of it as a roadmap to help athletes improve. It's a way that athletes, get to have some say over what we're going to be working on in practice. So I think that part is really important. So really understanding, teaching the athlete that there's no right or wrong answers here. We want you to assess yourself, identify the mental skills that are really critical for volleyball, and it's going to help us lay the foundational roadmap for how we're going to approach your training. Step 2 is brainstorming. So at this point, I do want to clarify that step 2 is going to be different if you're working with an individual athlete one-on-one or if you're working with a team. If you're working with an individual athlete one-on-one, you're basically having a conversation with the individual athlete that answers this question. What, in your opinion, are the qualities or characteristics of an elite athlete in volleyball? You can reword the question. If you're working with some younger athletes, it might be something like, what are the most important mental skills that you think are important for you to be successful in volleyball? And if those athletes get stuck, especially the younger athletes, I would encourage you to be like, okay, well, let's just have a conversation. Like, who is your role model in volleyball? Who's your favorite volleyball player, right? Maybe encourage the athletes, or as a team, you can watch a college volleyball match. Have the young athletes pick their favorite player and just spend time looking at describe how they are on the court, describe how they are with their team. What are the mental skills that you see coming through as an athlete? So we're answering that question, and we're basically, the goal of this stage is to identify the top 8 to 12 mental skills. I usually go with 8. I think 8 is enough for volleyball teams. But you can do more. Sometimes we get to number 8 and teams really don't want cut one out. So there is some leeway there. If we're doing it with teams, I cannot stress the importance of this process. The actual process of identifying what the top 8 skills are. The way I approach it with teams is, if we're doing it with a team, I'll divide the team up into small groups, usually about 4 or 5 players. If you have a smaller team, you can do 3. And each group is going to answer the question, just like we would in an individual session, and they're going to come up with their top 8 mental skills. And then each team will, if you have a whiteboard, you can write it on the whiteboard. If you're like a club or high school team, you have a gym, even just like half a court, I would suggest just bringing in sticky notes. Players love sticky notes. Bring in the sticky notes. Every group gets a sticky note, and you're writing one mental skill on each sticky note, putting it in the center. And when we're done with this stage, what we're going to have is a whole, we're going to have each group will have listed 8 sticky notes. And then we're going to compare the skills that the players have identified. And the purpose of this stage is we have to now get, we've depending on how many players on the team you have, you might have 30 sticky notes up there, and you've got to, as a team, get it down to 8. What are the top 8 to make you successful on this team with this particular set of players, which was maybe different than last year's and might be different than next year's. Often at this stage, what happens is there's always going to be a couple that are in every groups, right? Confidence might be in everyone's, or concentration. And then, so that's easy because we can just identify, oh, every single group said this, so that's for sure one of our team's top 8. What happens is coming up with maybe like numbers 3 through 8 or 3 through 9 end up in a debate over what the most important mental skills are to be successful on your team. And this, I really want to encourage you to don't shy away from this debate. This debate can be so helpful in terms of learning how to listen and communicate with your teammates. So this can become really about the process. This can be about conflict resolution, listening, communication. Leaders often emerge in this conversation. There's so much happening within this process. When I do it with my college teams, this second stage could take an hour, and it would go on longer if I let it. But usually we try to contain it. So just be mindful that this discussion, often what happens is players want to get straight to the end, right? They want to get straight to the result of the task is to identify the top 8 skills. So that's where they want to get. And this portion can get rushed. I really want to encourage you to sit in the discomfort of disagreeing on what the top 8 skills are and having to navigate that conflict as a team. And then the last part of this stage is then we have to define the mental skills. So once we agree on the top 8, we're taking, what I will usually do with my team is say, okay, we've got our top 8. Now each group take 2 of the skills, define it. And then as a team, we look at the definitions and we assess as a team, do we like these definitions? Is there any repetitiveness? Is there anything that doesn't feel quite right? Now is the time to edit. And then this usually ends up being usually a little minor debate. It's not as significant as the initial debate on the top 8 skills, but a really active discussion. So that is step 2. And then finally, this is what it should look like. At this stage now, we've got the performance profile. I have the athletes write each mental skill on the outer rim, and then you're coloring in, you're basically rating yourself 1 to 10 individually on where you are with each mental skill. In this example, there's 12 or 12. In the worksheet I gave you, I used 8 because I think that works best for the volleyball teams. Again, don't get too caught up on the number of it. But there's a couple important things here to remember is that you could approach it a couple different ways. So if you're doing it with an individual athlete, what I recommend is you're asking them to go ahead and fill it out for themselves. So they're going to go ahead and self-evaluate on these mental skills that they've identified. The coach can then independently fill out one for that athlete, and one option would be to compare those 2. But you don't have to go that route. You can also just have that individual conversation with the athlete. Okay, like what, like if I'm looking at this mental performance profile, I'm thinking, okay, on I'm concerned about the self-talk. It's really low. What's going on there? What's going through that athlete's head? Like, I had no idea that the negative self-talk was low, right? Because they have their, maybe like their attitude and their motivation's really high. So, and they seem really flexible. I had no idea that the negative self-talk. So it can be very revealing. And that's what I mean by getting into your athlete's head. And then something else to consider is if you're doing it with a team. So for example, if I'm an independent mental performance consultant, if I'm coming in doing it with my college teams, I will have every athlete individually fill this out. And then I like to maintain and offer that confidentiality or that privacy around that individual performance score. So I might have to ask the athletes to fill it out individually and then bring it into our one-on-one sessions. And then I might provide the coaches like the mean, the average score for the whole team. So the coach has a sense. If you're a coach working with a club team or a high school team, that's not necessarily going to matter. You might ask everyone to fill it out individually, and then you still might want to average it just out of curiosity if to work on team stuff. But this can really provide structure for you in your individual conversations. Another way to do this, I will give you the worksheet so you can do it with your athletes. Just print it and share it with your athletes. But also consider that if you want to do it online, oftentimes if I'm doing it with a bigger group or if I'm doing it with a college team, I might just create a Google form 1 through 8. Once we've gotten through stage 2, I'm just dropping in each mental skill on the Google form, telling the athletes to rate themselves. It graphs it automatically. I share the link with the team. Everyone fills it out, and then I've got the graph automatically. It's super fast and easy, and then it's saved. So either way is fine. But then one of the things I really like about this is it really gives you like a visual image of where the athletes are. So if you're doing it with young athletes, I would recommend printing the worksheet out, bringing in some colored pencils into practice, letting them color, and letting them just kind of enjoy the process and have fun with it. So hopefully that gave you a good overview. A couple other things that I want to make sure I cover with performance profiling is when to use it. I like to use it at the beginning of the season. So maybe like first week of practice, this is what we're doing right from the beginning, because it's like a measuring stick. We know where they are. And then, and I like to do it as a team activity to start having those team building conversations. And it sort of lays the groundwork for the season. And then I will save those results, come back to it mid-season, and then do like either like kind of right before playoffs or after playoffs end of season assessment, so that we're looking at how did these change over the course of the season. Are there any like real indicators? Sometimes like if confidence dropped significantly, then I know, okay, let's talk to the athlete about like what's going on. Why did your confidence drop? How can we work with that, like to make those changes? Also just want to recognize that this strategy it could be problem focused or strength based, depending on your like theoretical orientation. I'm more of a positive psychologist. So I really like to make it more of like a strength based activity, by really focusing on the athlete's strengths and how we can improve them. And then I also just want to acknowledge that I've given you a very basic version. The worksheet is really designed for like, you can use it with your club teams, your high school teams, even middle school and younger. But there are more advanced versions. You can make it as complex as you want, by like identifying opposites and other opposing qualities and things like that. But honestly, for young players and even with like high school, college players, this is a great tool to be able to structure those team conversations and then also one-on-one conversations. And it helps you to, and it's helpful because it's so easy to calculate and interpret the results visually for young players. So I'm gonna go ahead and pause there. These are my references. They will also be included in your module. You can get access to those and dive a little deeper. And This is my contact information. Any of you want to get connected, please feel free to reach out. I have a website. You can drop your email in, get a workbook. There's lots more free worksheets that you can use with your players because I have played volleyball my whole life and worked with volleyball players my whole life. The content on my site is very, very volleyball focused, which will be really helpful for you all and your players. And yeah, we're going to go ahead and open it up for questions. Love to hear some what you all are thinking and connect.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that, Brooke. That was awesome. I've had a few questions sent my way in chat.